The recent penetration of U.S. airspace by suspected Chinese spy balloons might not pose the biggest threat to America. So what's the greater threat? China's military, North Korean missiles, Putin's war in Ukraine? Well, appearing on the 700 Club recently, former U.S. Secretary of State and former CIA Director Mike Pompeo suggests the biggest battle for the country's future is over who controls young American minds.
The next generation will grow up thinking, gosh, we were taught America is racist. We were taught America is founded on an illogical idea and there is an oppressor class. You can't get those things back. Xi Jinping's a bad guy. I spent time with him. Chairman Kim, bad guy. I spent time with him. The Taliban, evil. Vladimir Putin, the same. But none of those things pose the same risk that we don't transmit to the next generation, that parents aren't permitted to teach their children their value set, and that our schools screw that up.
Well, our next guest contends some dark forces are at work. Tyrants of all stripes are working to control what you think and how you live. Stella Morabito is a former CIA analyst specializing in communist propaganda. Her book is The Weaponization of Loneliness: How Tyrants Stoke Fear and Isolation to Silence, Divide, and Conquer. Stella, it's so good to talk with you. It's not only Mike Pompeo, but more parents believe communist propaganda is inundating their children's minds. We'll get to that in a minute, what's happening in the classrooms. But first, tell us how the Chinese, others are using social media, other forms of communication to control our lives and minds.
Well, that's right. Propaganda is a really effective tool, especially if you have a population that doesn't have access to any other ideas, any other narratives. And it's very easy, especially in education of children, when they're really impressionable, to inflict really certain ideas that are not healthy.
China's Chairman Mao and Russia's Joseph Stalin were communist propaganda masters, and Adolf Hitler, of course, knew how to use propaganda to generate hatred for the Jews, but it's still happening today around the world. Tell us what you believe is happening globally.
The three things that are different today is that the reach is global, and that's because, number two, we've got all of these new communications technologies that have a very deep reach, but not just across national borders. They have a very deep reach within each human being. You know, all of the screen time and the devices and the metaverse, what we're talking about now, that's virtual reality, all of this stuff, especially for youth, has a very deep reach in getting that sort of sense of alienation and isolation going. And then number three, we aren't dealing with just one demagogue anymore. We're not just dealing with a Hitler or a Mao or a Stalin or a Lenin. We're dealing with what I call a hydra-headed beast, which is big government, big media, big tech, the corporate world, the woke corporate world, all pushing these not just globalists, but I believe very isolating, agendas on everyone.
And right here in the United States, it seems like divide and conquer is the approach. So how is our government manipulating what we think and how we live?
Well, I don't know if your listeners recall the push to have what was called a misinformation governance board in the United States. I think really the most dangerous thing of all is censorship, cutting people off from information that only the government will, that the government does not approve of, or any other maybe government associated or media monopoly associated narrative that they don't want people exposed to. There are many, many examples I could point out, but for example, the transgender lobby doesn't want anybody knowing anything about detransitioning, which is really a big thing now. But you can go on and list a lot of different agendas. And of course, in the United States, we keep getting this push for censorship, these ideas of, just cutting people off from under the guise of misinformation, cutting people off from any other narrative, any other idea.
And in the classroom, children at a young age are taught to question their biological gender identity and that their own country is evil. The Constitution is racist. Is this a planned leftist propaganda strategy to influence minds and lives, or just misguided education?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. I think there are, those who really do have this grand, agenda, for centralized power. I mean, this is a very old story. All of those utopian revolutions were about creating a new order. But there are also a lot of people just kind of go along with it because they don't even hear about anything else because of the media monopoly. And then you have those who, just do the virtue signaling, who think that the only way to be a good person is to follow along with these agendas, because so much of the methods, so many of the methods used to push these agendas forward involve the threat of isolating and ostracizing somebody who doesn't get with the program. I mean, you've heard all of the demonizing words that are used to shut people up. For example, bigot, hater, this phobic, that phobic, some kind of phobic, conspiracy theorist, white supremacist, fascist, domestic terrorists now for parents who complain at school board meetings. And yes, I mean, the way to control a population is, first of all, to shut down any other narrative, any other information.
Okay, the book is The Weaponization of Loneliness: How Tyrants Stoke Fear and Isolation to Silence, Divide, and Conquer. Stella Morabito, thank you for sharing your insights.